Every Christmas, my father left one chair empty at our dinner table. No one was ever allowed to sit there. The year after he passed away, I finally learned who he'd been waiting for, and I wished I'd asked him sooner. Hi, my name is Julia Bennett. I'm 35 years old, and until last Christmas, I thought my father's strangest habit was simply an old family tradition. Every Christmas Eve, no matter how many people came to dinner, he always set one extra place at the table. One plate, one glass, one set of silverware, and one empty chair. No one ever questioned it. At least, not anymore. When I was little, I asked if someone was coming over. Dad smiled and said, "Maybe." The next year, I asked again. His answer never changed. Maybe. As I got older, I stopped asking. My younger brother, Noah, loved making jokes about it. "Leave some cookies there," he'd laugh. "Maybe Santa's running late." Mom would smile and shake her head. Dad would smile too, but there was always something different about his smile. It never reached his eyes. Every year, just before we sat down for dinner, Dad would quietly walk to that empty chair. He'd straighten it, adjust the plate, then rest his hand on the back of the chair for just a few seconds, almost like he was greeting someone. One Christmas, my aunt finally asked him, "David, are you ever going to tell us who that seat belongs to?" The room went silent. Dad looked at the chair, then back at everyone else. "It's reserve." That was all he said. Nobody asked another question. After dinner, I pulled Mom aside while we were washing dishes. "Who is the chair really for?" She stopped drying a plate. For a moment, she looked toward the dining room to make sure Dad wasn't nearby. Then she quietly replied, "Your father made a promise a long time ago." "What kind of promise?" She gave me a small smile. "The kind you don't break." Before I could ask anything else, she changed the subject. Life moved on. I became an elementary school teacher. Noah moved across the country for work. Mom passed away unexpectedly when I was 30. After that, Christmas dinners became much smaller. Just Dad, Noah, and me. But one thing never changed. That empty chair. Then, last winter, Dad called me. His voice sounded weaker than I'd ever heard it. "Julia, I want you both home for Christmas." There was something in the way he said it. Not sadness, not fear. Almost urgency. Without asking questions, I booked my ticket that same night. I thought I was coming home for another quiet Christmas. I had no idea it would be the last Christmas I'd ever spend with my father. That Christmas Eve, long after everyone had gone to bed, I woke up because I heard my father talking downstairs. When I quietly looked into the dining room, he wasn't alone. He was smiling at the empty chair. For a few seconds, I stood completely still. The hallway was dark except for the soft glow coming from the dining room. Dad was sitting in his usual chair. The Christmas lights from the tree reflected across the window behind him, making the room feel strangely peaceful. He wasn't reading. He wasn't watching television. He was talking, quietly, almost as if someone was sitting across from him. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough to know he wasn't talking to himself. "I know," he whispered. "I wish things had been different too." A long pause followed. Then he nodded. "I've kept my promise." The word sent a chill through me. Promise. It was the same word Mom had used years earlier. "Your father made a promise a long time ago." Without realizing it, I stepped closer. The old wooden floor creaked beneath my feet. Dad immediately turned toward the hallway. "Julia!" I froze. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled. "What are you doing awake?" "I heard someone talking." He glanced at the empty chair before looking back at me. "Couldn't sleep." I stepped into the dining room. "Who were you talking to?" He looked down at the table. "No one." I forced a small laugh. Dad, I heard you. You were having a conversation. He slowly folded his hands together. Sometimes, he said softly, people talk when they miss someone. His answer didn't satisfy me, because this didn't sound like someone remembering the past. It sounded like someone expecting an answer. I looked at the empty chair. The plate was still there, untouched. The glass was full of water. Even the folded napkin sat perfectly beside the fork, exactly as if a guest had simply stepped away for a moment. Dad, whose place is this? He followed my eyes. For several seconds, he didn't speak. Finally, he smiled. The same person it's always been for. I sighed. You know that's not an answer. No, it isn't. For the first time in years, I saw sadness spread across his face. I always hoped, he whispered, that one Christmas. He stopped himself before finishing the sentence. I waited, but he never continued. Instead, he slowly stood up and picked up the untouched plate. Dinner's over. The conversation was finished, at least for him. The next morning, Noah arrived just before breakfast. The house instantly felt alive again. He hugged Dad tightly, joked about getting older, and immediately started teasing me for bringing homemade cinnamon rolls instead of buying them from my favorite bakery. For a little while, everything felt normal. Then Noah noticed the dining table. He looked at the empty chair, smirked, and said exactly what he'd said every Christmas since we were kids. So, did your mystery guest finally show up this year? Dad didn't smile. He quietly answered, Not yet. The room fell silent. For the first time, Noah didn't laugh either. That afternoon, while Dad was taking a nap, I decided to clean out the old china cabinet for him. As I reached behind a stack of serving plates, my hand touched a small envelope with just 2 words written across the front. For Julia. I stared at the envelope for several seconds. It wasn't hidden very well. It was simply resting behind a stack of old holiday plates, almost as if someone expected it to be found someday. My name was written across the front in my father's handwriting. For Julia. Nothing else. No date. No explanation. Just my name. I picked it up carefully. The paper had turned slightly yellow with age, but it was still sealed. 1,000 questions raced through my mind. Why would Dad leave me a letter and never mention it? Why hide it inside the china cabinet? And most importantly, when had he written it? Footsteps echoed from the hallway. I quickly slipped the envelope into the pocket of my sweater. Noah walked into the kitchen carrying 2 mugs of coffee. There you are, he said. I've been looking for you. I forced a smile. Just cleaning. He glanced toward the dining room. You know, he said quietly, I always hated that chair. I looked at him. Hate it? He nodded. It made Christmas feel... He searched for the right word. Incomplete. That surprised me. I thought you always joked about it. I did. He smiled sadly. Because I was a kid. But every year, I'd catch Dad staring at it. It was like he wasn't really with us. For the first time, I realized Noah had noticed the same things I had. We'd simply dealt with them differently. Did Mom ever tell you anything? He shook his head. Only once. What did she say? He leaned against the counter. I asked her why Dad always left that chair empty. And isn't it? She said, some promises are heavier than grief. I felt my stomach tighten. Mom had said almost the same thing to me years earlier. A promise. Everything kept coming back to a promise. Before I could tell Noah about the envelope, Dad slowly walked into the kitchen. You two look serious. We were just talking about Christmas, Noah replied. Dad smiled. Good. That's what today is for. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. We decorated cookies, listened to old Christmas records, looked through family photo albums. For a little while, it felt like every other Christmas. but I couldn't stop thinking about the envelope in my pocket. Late that evening, after Noah and Dad had gone to bed, I sat alone in my old bedroom. The house was silent. Snow tapped gently against the window. I placed the envelope on the bed in front of me. Dad had never told me not to open it. He hadn't even told me it existed. I carefully broke the seal. Inside, there wasn't a letter. There was only a single photograph. The picture showed my father standing in front of our house, almost 35 years earlier. He looked much younger. He was smiling. And standing beside him was a little girl I had never seen before. She couldn't have been older than 6. She was holding my father's hand. On the back of the photograph, in my mother's handwriting, were 6 words that made my heart stop. Never stop saving her place, David. I stared at the photograph over and over. I knew every face in our family albums, but I had never seen that little girl before. The question wasn't just who she was anymore. It was why my parents had erased her from our family's history. I couldn't take my eyes off the photograph. The little girl looked happy. She couldn't have been older than 6. She had curly brown hair tied back with a white ribbon, and she was smiling at my father as if he were the safest person in the world. Yet, I had never seen her before. Not in our family albums. Not in the boxes of old photographs Mom kept in the attic. Nowhere. I turned the picture over again. Never stop saving her place, David. Those 6 words echoed in my mind. Saving her place. Was that what the empty chair was? The next morning, I slipped the photograph into my jacket before heading downstairs. Dad was already awake, making coffee. The smell of cinnamon rolls filled the kitchen. He looked up and smiled. Morning. Morning. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I reached into my pocket and placed the photograph on the table between us. His smile disappeared instantly. He stared at it without touching it. Where did you find this? It was inside the envelope. He closed his eyes. So, you found it. You knew I would? He nodded slowly. I hoped it wouldn't be until after I was gone. I pulled out a chair and sat across from him. Dad, who is she? His fingers trembled slightly as he picked up the photograph. For a long time, he simply looked at it. Finally, he whispered. Her name was Lily. The name meant nothing to me. Is she family? He looked toward the dining room, toward the empty chair, then quietly answered, yes. My heart skipped a beat. How? Another long silence. I can't tell you that. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You've waited 30 years. You leave me a photograph. You tell me she's family, and now you won't explain? His eyes filled with tears. Because the story isn't mine to tell. Before I could respond, Noah walked into the kitchen. He immediately noticed the tension. What's going on? Neither of us answered. Noah looked down at the photograph. Who's the little girl? Dad carefully slid the picture back across the table. Someone we should have never forgotten. Noah frowned. I've never seen her before. I know. Dad stood up and slowly walked toward the hallway. Just before leaving the room, he stopped. Without turning around, he quietly said, if you want the truth, go visit Margaret. I looked at Noah. Margaret? Dad nodded. She was your mother's closest friend. She knows what happened. Then he walked away. Noah and I looked at each other in complete silence. Neither of us had heard that name in years. As children, Margaret used to visit our house almost every weekend. Then, one day, she simply disappeared from our lives. That afternoon, Noah found an old address book in Mom's desk. Margaret's name was still inside. Right beneath it, Mom had written one sentence in red ink. If Julia ever asks about Lily, tell her everything. The drive to Margaret's house took almost an hour. Neither Noah nor I spoke much along the way. The photograph rested on my lap. Every few minutes, I'd turn it over and read the same 6 words. Never stop saving her place, David. I couldn't stop wondering why my mother had written them. Margaret lived in a small white cottage just outside town. The porch looked exactly as I remembered from childhood. Flower pots lined the front steps, even though winter had already arrived. I knocked softly. A few seconds later, the door opened. Margaret looked older than I remembered, but her eyes were exactly the same. The moment she saw me, she smiled. Julia. Then she noticed Noah. Her smile faded. You finally came. It wasn't a question. It sounded like she'd been expecting us. She invited us inside without another word. The living room was warm and filled with old family photographs. Some of them included my parents. Others showed people I didn't recognize. I placed the photograph on the coffee table. Margaret's hands began to shake. So, you found it? I nodded. Dad said you could tell us who Lily was. Margaret looked at the picture for a long time. Finally, she whispered, I always hoped this day would never come. I leaned forward. Please, I don't want another secret. She closed her eyes. Lily wasn't your cousin. She wasn't a neighbor. And she wasn't a family friend. I held my breath. Margaret looked directly at me. She was the little girl your parents planned to adopt. Neither Noah nor I spoke. For several seconds, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Adopt? Noah finally asked. Margaret nodded. Your mother volunteered at a children's center every Saturday. That's where they met Lily. They loved her almost immediately. They spent nearly 2 years completing the adoption process. I looked down at the photograph. The way Dad was holding her hand, the way she smiled at him, it suddenly made sense. They already thought of her as their daughter, I whispered. They did. Margaret's voice broke. She even called them Mom and Dad. Tears filled my eyes. Then, what happened? Margaret looked toward the window. Snow had started falling outside. 3 days before the adoption became official, she stopped speaking. Her eyes filled with tears. It all fell apart. I felt my heart pounding. How? Margaret slowly reached into the drawer of the side table beside her chair. She pulled out a faded newspaper clipping. She placed it gently in front of me. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. Across the front page, one headline immediately caught my eye. Local 6-year-old girl disappears without a trace. My breath caught. The name beneath the headline was only one word. Lily. I looked at the photograph, then back at the newspaper. For 32 Christmases, my father hadn't been waiting for the past. He'd been waiting for someone he never stopped believing would come home. I couldn't breathe. My eyes remained fixed on the newspaper clipping. Local 6-year-old girl disappears without a trace. The date at the top caught my attention. December 23rd, 32 years ago, exactly 2 days before Christmas. I slowly looked up at Margaret. They never found her? Margaret quietly shook her head. No. The police searched for weeks. Volunteers came from neighboring towns. Your parents never stopped looking. I felt tears filling my eyes. They were so close to bringing her home. They already had. Margaret smiled through her tears. In every way that mattered. Lily was already their daughter. She reached toward an old wooden cabinet beside the fireplace. From inside, she carefully removed a small red scarf. It was faded with age, but neatly folded. Lily left this at your parents' house the weekend before she disappeared. I gently touched the fabric. It was impossible to imagine such a small belonging carrying so much grief. Margaret continued. After the police ended the investigation, everyone told your parents they had to move on. But your father refused. I immediately thought of the empty chair. He believed she'd come back. Margaret nodded. Every Christmas, he said if Lily ever found her way home, she would never wonder if there was still a place waiting for her. The room fell silent. For 32 years, that chair had never represented sadness. It represented hope, hope that never disappeared. I finally understood why Dad had always insisted on setting one more plate. It wasn't because he couldn't accept the truth. It was because he couldn't bear the thought of Lily returning one Christmas, only to discover there was no place left for her. Noah quietly wiped away a tear. I used to joke about that chair. So did I whispered. Margaret smiled gently. Your father never blamed either of you. He wanted you to grow up with joy, not with his heartbreak. A week later, we buried Dad beside Mom. After everyone had gone home, Noah and I returned to the old house one last time. Christmas dinner was still sitting in the refrigerator. The dining table was exactly as Dad had left it. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then Noah quietly picked up one more plate. Without saying a word, he placed it on the table. I looked at him. You too. He smiled through his tears. I think Dad would have wanted one more Christmas. Together, we placed the plate, the glass, the silverware, and gently pulled out the empty chair. For the first time, I didn't see an empty seat. I saw a father who had loved a little girl so completely that he spent the rest of his life making sure she always had a place to come home to. As we prepared to leave, I noticed one final envelope tucked beneath Dad's chair. Inside was a single handwritten note. It read, Julia, if you're reading this, then you finally know why I never let anyone sit there. Love isn't measured by the time we get with someone. Sometimes it's measured by the place we keep for them, even when the whole world tells us to let go. If Lily ever comes home, tell her dinner is ready. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my coat. That Christmas, for the first time in my life, I understood that the chair had never been empty. It had always been filled with love.